So good morning, Cassandra.
Hi, Susan.
How are you?
I'm good. It's a cold day, but it's good.
Yeah. Well, I know we've chatted multiple times on the phone and we have some mutual clients as well. And one of the things that keeps coming up that you and I are discussing, but it's still proposed, are these new overtime rules that are coming out of DC. And while we don't have complete guidance or complete understanding, since we're still in the comment period, there are some things that employers may want to start thinking about. So I thought maybe we could start with what are those proposed overtime rules, maybe for employers that haven't heard of this yet. So I
Okay,
don't know how
great.
you want to dive in there, but a good talking point, I think.
Absolutely. So, yes, the Department of Labor is looking to raise the minimum weekly salary amount for a position to be considered exempt from overtime. So, our current threshold, as a reminder, is $684 a week, and that equates to $35,568 a year. So we don't yet know what they're going to propose, but we do know that many advocates are seeking for higher levels, as much as 62,000 to up over 80,000 a year. So that's much higher than even the 47,476 that was proposed back in 19 and 20 when we made the move to the 35,568. The bottom line, it is the administration's goal to make more employees eligible for overtime. So it's yet to be seen what the tolerance level will be for how far that goes, but they are definitely looking to increase it, and perhaps significantly.
And I think that's a really good point because as many businesses are starting to think about recession and thinking about wages and staff, we're hearing a lot in the media about reductions in force.
Yeah.
And if we have to change our employees, maybe job role or job focus in order to justify a higher salary, and therefore they're no longer subject to overtime, that could be pretty substantial for many employers.
Absolutely. It really affected not-for-profits badly when it happened. As you can imagine, they just can't afford the salary levels as, private and public employers. And, we had managers and directors who weren't going to hit, the salary exemption level. And that's very difficult for not-for-profits.
So we have these like two thought processes, right? We have uh, the one subset of individuals who are like, I want to do whatever it takes to be able to hire, recruit, retain top talent, and I want to do what's right. And then we have the other subset of folks, and they're like, when are we going to catch a breath in order to figure out and do it well? Thinking about our organizational structure and our job families and all of that. This makes that a little bit more complicated. And I don't know about you, but I'm sort of afraid of the volume of requests that you and I might have, knowing that we utilize you for some of our compensation projects, just because human nature, people wait
Yeah.
rather than doing it a bit more proactively.
Yeah.
Do you know when the new proposed rules are expected to be released, knowing that we're in the comment period right now?
No, that's actually the biggest mystery of all. They said that they would issue a new proposal in April of last year, and then they said it would be October. And now still we are waiting. And, my biggest concern, well, a couple of things. One, employers did all this proactive looking and preparing last time, and then 2 days before it was to be implemented, they pulled the rug out from under it, right? So people spent time, money, resources getting ready. So I think they're going to be more fearful this time about spending the time and resources. The other thing that concerns me is a lot of people think, Susan, that you just have to meet the salary test. And that's just part one of a two-part test. And a lot of people don't know that you also have to qualify under one of the duties exemptions test. So you could raise employee salaries all you want, to whatever the new amount is going to be. But if they can't pass those duties exemptions test, you still can't have them exempt from overtime.
You bring up a great point because right now, just for example, I'm working with 3 different clients on job descriptions to make sure they're written in a compliant format, right? So some of the very basics, like who do you report to? Are you hourly and exempt, or salary non-exempt. Like there could be so many different combinations for a particular role. And it really does come down to those essential job duties that
Yes.
someone has, not just their experience or their title. And I think no fault of anyone's, right? It's complex. And that's why people hire folks like you and myself to help them. Do you think there's other changes that might come alongside these proposed overtime rules? And if you do anticipate that, what are some of the things that you're hearing in your space?
So we do think that the level for the highly compensated exemption is going to go up. It's currently 107,000. It would just make sense if they're going to lower the minimum threshold, they're probably going to raise that as well. We're also hearing rumblings about changes to the exemption duties test themselves. They've been really afraid to touch those, so it will be interesting to see if they do or not. Some fear that they will adopt the California laws, which are extremely difficult to pass for about anyone. And then the other thing that we're hearing is they may finally set an automatic increase to the minimum salary increase. So instead of going so many years before they look at this and then realizing they can't take it as far as it needs to go that fast, starting to set in some automatic increases. So those are the things that we're hearing that might come with it. So remains to be seen.
Should be interesting. I go to my annual conference in February, and so it'll be interesting to hear from the legislators sort of what's on their mind, what they're anticipating, and sort of where they might, vote. So the legislators I'll be meeting with are here in Indiana. They tend to be a little bit more conservative, minus a few exceptions, but interesting as we come at it from the recruitment and retention perspective. And then finally on this topic, and then I'd like to move to pay transparency, because that's another big topic that many clients ask me about. What do you think an employer should do right now in order to maybe not do the full compensation analysis, but maybe to do incremental steps that will help make it a little bit easier when or if this actually comes to fruition?
Well, yeah, two things. One, they should definitely review and update their job descriptions to reflect the duties the employee performs and make sure that they can still classify under one of the exemptions based on their duties. And an employer should be doing that once every year anyhow, Susan, right? Making sure that they can still pass those exemption duties test. And then the second thing would be, you might want to look at your employees are at that current minimum, that's $684 a week if you have anyone, right there. And maybe look upwards to those making $1,000, $1,200 a week and just see if the legislation passes and if it goes up, which of those employees would you be willing to give that much of an increase to, right? Because it could be a pretty hefty increase to still maintain their exemption from overtime pay. They still got to meet the duties. So, you got to be sure of that first, but then which ones would you be willing to increase and what would that look like against your budget for this year? And, maybe even start to have some discussions with your CFO. Hey, can we put this in the budget somewhere? We've identified a half a dozen people, maybe that we'd want to give increases to keep their exemption from overtime status. So those are the two things we're recommending people do right now. And one of them they ought to be doing every year anyhow. So it's really just one small extra step after that.
I would agree with you. I think a lot of people are nervous, especially, earlier in 2022, there was discussion about hiring additional IRS folks and then also hiring additional auditors with the DOL. So takeaway from this particular topic, definitely check your HR practices, make sure things are buttoned up, and get ready for whatever journey lies ahead. Not to be Debbie Downer, but some states have already passed pay transparency rules. New York, California, as an example. And at HCC, we work with several multi-state clients, and it's hard to kind of keep up with state by state rules and regulations. Yeah. But what we're hearing from clients with employees in those states is that pay transparency has actually sort of been a good thing, right? It's sort of removed that I wonder what everyone else is making question, or I wonder what the pay range is. Like, I'm here and how do I get to X? I think it's opened some of the dialogue, maybe that we've been a little bit more closed to in the past. What are you hearing just as we start the conversation?
Yeah, same thing. But just as many who are excited that it's opening conversation are just not so happy that it's opening
Right.
the conversation.
Always
And
both sides of the coin.
it is. And I think some folks don't realize like how close this is to us at this point, because there's about 5 cities that have some kind of pay transparency laws now, and Cincinnati and Toledo, Ohio are the 2 closest ones to us. And so people think, oh, well, maybe, just a state, has laws. And while there's about 14 of those now, there's 5 cities too. And so it's not even about just keeping up with which states anymore. It's about also keeping up with which cities have implemented pay transparency laws. So yeah, you kind of need a chart anymore.
Right. I think for any of our clients, mutual or the ones that we work with alongside other folks in our industries, I think it's really important for people to start asking more questions and start finding resources. Like I know we use SHRM, and then you and I have various other resources based on our particular areas of focus where we do get news feeds. We work with our legal counsel. In our case, we have legal counsel that has offices all across the country. So it's a little easier, maybe a little bit more timely to get some of those updates. But as it relates to pay transparency legislation, updating job descriptions, as we talked about earlier, what are some of the challenges that you see as it relates to pay transparency?
Well, in addition to keeping up with which states and which cities, is then keeping up with what are the differences in the laws. Okay, so as an example, like California and Washington require their salary ranges and job postings, while Rhode Island only requires employers to provide a salary range if applicants or employees request it. So there are some that absolutely require postings and some that do not. But the challenges that we're seeing is it's pretty simple. You're going to get more pay questions, right? It is going to open the floodgates. However, if employers will do their homework and be prepared, they'll be ready. One of the other challenges we see is, of course, employees will be discussing pay with their coworkers, right? You cannot retaliate against employees for that. And it's to the point now where they're even creating and sharing spreadsheets of pay data as they come across what people make. And if you want to know what's really going on with pay transparency, go out to TikTok. It's all over. And it's interesting because every generation that comes forth has less and less tolerance for no pay transparency. So Gen Z, being the most current one in the workforce, they have 0 tolerance for this. And they will move to other companies who do have pay transparencies. Mm-hmm. And then one of the final challenges we see is, I'll call it untrained managers to handle the pay questions. When employees have pay questions, the first place they're going to go is their manager, right? They trust their manager. And we just have untrained managers with how to deal with the questions when they come their way. And that's back on corporates, who haven't, educated and trained their managers on how their pay practices work.
I think you bring up a great point. Let's go to training for a moment. There are, again, 2 sides to this coin, but there are a lot of employers that for many years have sort of put the brakes on training and upskilling with fear that they're going to train and upskill their employees and then they'll leave, which in my opinion is a huge compliment personally, right?
Yeah.
Like I had a pretty amazing manager years ago who was like, if I can train you to be my replacement someday, then I've done my job. But then you have that other subset of who are like, oh, yes, we need people that can critically think. Yes, we need people that are better at time management. Yes, we need people that are problem solvers. We need this diverse population of people, but we don't want to open up too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you see things from a compensation perspective. I see some things from, in my day-to-day, more on the performance side. And a lot of the performance issues come from people not having the tools and resources that they need to thrive in their current environment.
Yep.
And so now is the time to look at our compensation, our pay ranges, our job descriptions. What is the future training that employers need to offer to their people, so that, again, we're not having to continue to hire new people all the time, but rather we're able to retain our top talent with just adding a few extra tools in the toolbox, if you will, for an analogy.
Yes.
So I'm actually excited about pay transparency, because how I come at it from my viewpoint is that it gives employees an idea of what they need to do in order to get to the next step.
Exactly.
Or what do I need to do to get to the next role? And then what is my salary capability in the future? And to me, that is a huge positive for the future. So
It is. It really helps employees better understand the value of different skills and responsibilities that they haven't been able to understand in the past.
right. And half of it is, just gaining some clear expectations of what do I need to do in order to achieve X, Y, or Z. And I think that opens a great dialogue, and it builds credibility and trust within the organization, which we keep hearing about culture change within business. And this is just one way to start that.
That's exactly right.
So I don't want to diverge too far off this topic, but I get really passionate. What are some of the best practices that you are seeing for companies that are getting this right now?
So the first thing is posting or advertising their correct pay range, and not just part of it. Okay. Don't just, give the lower third of the pay range, advertise the pay range. And then, how can you have good pay ranges if you don't market benchmark your jobs every couple of years and keep your pay ranges up to date? And there are even some places like Colorado where you can only post the pay rates for Colorado. So even though your job may be remote, or it may be seen advertised in other states, you have to post the pay for Colorado. So that's kind of interesting. Also, train employees on your compensation philosophy and your benchmarking methodology. You're not giving the bank away, okay, when you tell them that much. It actually gives them more confidence in the fact that you are doing studies, you are comparing to the right industry and employer sizes and revenue or budget sizes and geographical locations. You don't have to tell everybody the results of the study, but you can let them know information that is going to make them feel more comfortable that the employer is doing the right thing.
Can we pause for just a moment? One thing that you said that I think is really important is pay philosophy.
Yes.
But there are a lot of employers that say that we want our pay range to be within the 50th percentile, as an example. But our competitive advantage or our value proposition is that we offer you more PTO, or we charge less for benefits. So there's also this pay philosophy discussion that includes really total compensation, right? Not just focusing on the hourly rate or the annual salary. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So first of all, everyone should have a total rewards philosophy. So that speaks to how are you going to balance compensation and benefits? Are you going to give compensation more weight than benefits, benefits more weight than compensation? Exactly what is your total rewards philosophy? And that, of course, includes, PTO and those kinds of things as well. Then you need a separate compensation philosophy. So where are you going to target on average to pay in the market? Is that the 50th percentile? Is it something less? Is it something more, depending on your total rewards philosophy? And then you need a benefits philosophy. Because how are you going to, compare your benefits to market? Are your benefits going to be a little lower and you're going to have your compensation a little higher? Is, your philosophy to kind of balance them both equally at the market? Just kind of what is your philosophy? So it's really good for employers to have a compensation philosophy, a benefits philosophy, and then an overarching total rewards philosophy.
One of the ways that I've seen a lot of employers start is by leveraging the technology where their employees get paid from, right? Their HRIS system, where their benefits are elected, and really looking at that total compensation statement. And then taking the time, yes, it does take time, but taking the time to walk employees through that total compensation statement so they truly understand the value of what they're receiving from their employer. I think that goes a long way. And again, it opens the dialogue for transparency, for trust, and many other
Yes,
things that are going on.
that's right. Well, a few other best practices that we're seeing is conducting pay equity studies, and that's to ensure that, all the employees are appropriately placed in the pay ranges. The market could have moved faster than you moved your pay ranges, even faster than good employees got pay increases for. So we see a lot of that going on, and that is really important with more pay transparency, because that then helps the employer to be prepared for the questions when they come. They've done the review, they've looked at it, they know you're sitting where you should be. And then, of course, we're seeing a lot more pay discrimination analysis. We've gotten a lot of requests for those in the last couple of years. People are putting their DE&I goals out there. And to me, you can't really have good DE&I if you don't address pay discrimination.
And for those that are listening in, DE&I is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So just in case someone's unfamiliar with that acronym.
Thank you very much. Yes. And so it's important that you're looking at that as well, to make sure that you don't have any inadvertent pay discriminations occurring. I don't think people ever do anything maliciously. Things just happen over time, and your pay can get kind of out of whack, and it just needs some corrections sometimes.
And sometimes where I see that come up more frequently is like if there's been a leadership change, or if someone is getting ready for a merger or acquisition transaction. That's
Yes.
really where they sort of have to make sure everything's buttoned up, so that they're prepared for whatever is to come.
Well, and the other thing is they've got to bring new employees in the appropriate place in the range based on their education and experience. Gone are the days of, oh, well, you're making $10 an hour, we'll give you $10.50 an hour to come on board. We've got to look at employees in the same job. And if it's a single incumbent job, then we have to look at employees in similar jobs as well. And we've got to take into consideration, what relevant experience are they bringing to the table, and just appropriately place them in the range to begin with, instead of just trying to give them a small increase and get them in the door.
I think a lot of businesses are really wanting, their intent is to do things the right way. Sometimes they don't have the right manpower or woman power in the workplace that has the skill set to acknowledge and understand, I need to hire someone external that's independent to help us with a compensation analysis. And you and I, when we've had employers that have a really tight, we've been able to maybe just do 1, 2, or 3 job positions rather than doing a global analysis, even though that's probably a better way to do it. But there are ways to be creative in the compensation world to be within budget or make it a little bit more palatable for a small business.
Yes. And then kind of the last, I'll call it best practice that we're seeing in terms of pay transparency is what we hit on earlier, and that is training your managers and giving them the tools that they need to understand your compensation systems and to have those conversations. So we've put together things called managers compensation guides before that does speak to all those philosophies around total rewards, compensation, benefits, your pay structure, guidance on various pay decisions, any incentive or bonus plans you have and how do they work, just any kind of reward programs that you have. And, being sure that for the manager, you include any forms or systems that have to be used to implement, any of those changes or request any of those changes or to ask to have them reviewed. And, it's no different than a manager's handbook or a supervisor's handbook, but just here is our, manager's compensation guide to help you in this particular area.
Well, Cassandra, as always, I have learned so much from you, and I really appreciate you taking the time this morning to chat a little bit about some of the new or upcoming compensation topics. I know there's many more, so I'm sure that we will chat again. But thank you so much for your time this morning, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Very good, Susan. In closing, let me just say that, anyone who can get their employers to do just even a little bit more pay transparency, that really is going to increase the trust of your employees. And we all know this relationship is about trust. And we do see, as we talked about earlier, employers leaving to go to other employers who will do more pay transparency. So just kind of in closing, don't wait for legislation. Try and be a little bit more proactive if you can. We know sometimes, we get handcuffed by things we'd like to do, but we're not allowed to do. But as I always say to any, because I will have a supervisor say to me, well, what can I do about pay? I can't get HR, or I can't get, senior leadership. And my favorite saying is lead from where you are and advocate for your own people. Do what you can do. When you do have the ability to make merit decisions and bring people in at the right place, because you can lead from where you are. You may not be able to correct the whole company's situation, but you can be sure within your own area of responsibility, you're doing the right thing. So that's just a message I wanted to leave everyone with this morning. And don't try and slay the whole elephant. Just worry about your own space and do what you can.